My name is Megan Beaver. Joining me today on Mind the Divide is the Town of Los Gatos Assistant Town Manager, Arn Andrews. Along with the help of his colleagues, guidance from local CAL FIRE, arborists, and environmental consulting firms, the Town of Los Gatos put together a roadway vegetation management plan to aid in emergency evacuations, as well as an ad hoc wildfire committee report guiding in the preliminary steps of wildfire preparedness for their town, which spans from the WUI to the urban sector. Thank you for joining me, Arn.
Great.
Please tell me about your town's wildfire preparedness program and what progress you've made.
Sure. Thank you, Megan. So as you mentioned in your introduction, our town has about a third of our geography and what's referred to as the WUI environment. The topography, as you can imagine, is also hilly. And the fact that our town was founded in the late 1800s, we have a very old network of some of our roadways, which, as you can imagine, means one way in, one way out, ingress and egress. So when you put all of that together, and then you start to see the mega fires that have unfortunately occurred in our state in the last several years, the town started getting very serious about what we could do to try and either mitigate the potential for wildfire or be prepared in the event that we do have wildfire. And so one of the things our town council did was they put together what we referred to as an ad hoc wildfire committee. That committee was tasked with trying to figure out what a roadmap would look like to do everything we could to mitigate the effects of wildfire. It included representatives from the council, representatives from the community, and representatives from our local fire district. So one of the main areas, obviously, was how do we prepare for evacuation and what steps can we do? So we contracted with a firm to basically do a full review of all the roadways in our WUI and to pretty much grade them in terms of where they thought they were from vegetation management along the roadways, and then to prioritize where they thought we should do our first kind of use of budgetary dollars for vegetation management purposes. So they identified about 31 miles of total roadways in the WUI, and then they identified about another 11 miles of what they referred to as tier one, meaning, the areas that we should focus on immediately. And so we did that, and our council started giving budgetary dollars towards the project. The first year, we spent about $500,000, and that completed about 6 miles of roadway. This past year, they budgeted about another $500,000, which completed about 4 miles of roadway. One of the reasons it was fairly expensive per mile, if you look at it that way, was because we had been on a very long trim cycle, which meant these areas hadn't seen vegetation management in a very long time. So the hope is once we complete the entire 31 miles, we'll be on a much easier kind of regular operating cycle of vegetation management. But that's kind of where we are right now. We've done about 2 years of work already, and we have probably about another 20 miles ahead of us to complete the project.
That's fantastic. And could you speak on how you have coordinated some of your efforts with your neighboring towns and cities that are also sharing WUI with you? And you mentioned it in one of the documents, realistically, if something happens in one of them or in your town, it will be spreading to those neighbors. Have you coordinated any kind of strategic egress methods or management efforts where you're kind of all sharing that burden and collaborating together?
So to date, we don't have anything quite as comprehensive as what you're describing. That being said, we're all regional partners and we're aware of what each other is doing. And so, our neighboring town, Saratoga, is aware that we took on roadway vegetation management. They've actually done quite a few projects over the years with the help of the Fire Safe Council, getting grant funding for very specific shaded fuel break projects in their town. So we're all doing everything we can incrementally to chip away at the problem, but we haven't necessarily taken a much broader regional approach yet. For instance, like what they did in Marin County when they formed a JPA in Marin County to bring all the parties together, and then passed a tax initiative to then make sure they had annual funding towards vegetation management and other areas of wildfire management.
Yeah, which is fantastic.
Yeah, the Marin model is pretty interesting. In government, we tend to stand on the shoulders of others. I've actually taken a lot of what they've done to update our policies in town. I've used Mill Valley as an example a lot. I've used Marin as an example a lot to see what they're doing, to see if those are models that we could then put into effect here in town.
So your model is still growing and changing based on new information?
Sure. So, about 4 years ago, when we first started getting serious, one of the easiest things we could do is just review our own municipal code to make sure that nothing in our municipal code is necessarily going to be a deterrent to defensible space and vegetation management. And sure enough, we found lots of examples where we could update language or change things to make it clearer that, we're trying to encourage folks to, be good stewards of their land. We love our hillsides and we love the beauty of our forest canopy, but we need to manage that canopy really well. And
Correct.
so we updated our tree protection policy, we updated our weeds ordinance, and then we also really strengthened the section of our code where we start talking about defensible space. So several of those updates were crafted based on what I considered to be more kind of proactive and progressive communities, that had already done that kind of work. One of the things we did was, it's always been a recommendation from our county fire that you have a non-flammable 5-foot perimeter. And so we figured if it was a good enough recommendation for them, we would actually make it law. So for any new construction in the WUI, you have to have a 5-foot non-flammable perimeter from your building.
Yeah, I noticed you had also created some larger safe zones. I believe 10 feet or 30 feet were some of the numbers that you guys had extended some of those management areas for structures. And I was wondering if you could speak on, when I read the document, I thought of having been a homeowner in the mountains in that region, and I thought of some of the more smaller property sizes where 30 feet might actually extend over your property line and into your neighbors on some edges. And I wonder if there will be any kind of revamping of the document where you give a little bit more specificity to what you're asking those landowners and property owners to target when they're creating those safe spaces. There's a small list that you guys have of targeted trees to remove, and it does say that that's not a finished product. Will you be adding to that and creating a list for people to work from of these are trees that maybe you shouldn't have on your property and they should be taken out in that 30-foot space? Or are you kind of letting people run with it and clear what they find to be appropriate clearing? I think one of the problems that we're trying to mitigate is homeowners being afraid and then taking it upon themselves or having a crew come in and clear cut their property.
So you've a couple good questions, all within the one set of questions. So the first piece is, at the state level, the concept of 100 feet of defensible space is law. And so what we were doing is just kind of reminding our residents within our own municipal code, this is already law. And so anyone in the WUI is supposed to do what they can in terms of, vegetation management. Now, that being said, none of this is about clear cutting properties. When you go on whether it's the state website, they talk about green and lean or green and clean. So
Mm.
obviously the first 30 feet from your house is an area where, you know, they're concerned about spacing of flammable fuels. They're concerned about living up. The other 70 feet is really, you know, property management as opposed to clear cutting. And so we are not advocates of, you know, folks clear cutting, but we are advocates of being a good land steward and maintaining your property in a way that's consistent with defensible space. You also then added in a piece, which is 100 feet, to your point, can often blend into another neighbor's yard. And so this is an area where there is a portion of the state law that could dictate what a neighbor should do. What we're doing is taking a softer approach at first and just letting folks know that this kind of section of the law exists, but we encourage neighbors to be neighbors first. You know, work together. You all share the same risk. The risk doesn't stop at your property line. And so everybody understand and appreciate that it's a shared risk. Now, that being said, we did add language in our Muni Code citing the portion of the state law that says in the event a neighbor is non-responsive, we have created language that says the fire marshal or their representative will go and observe the situation. And if they determine that there is a legitimate risk, then similar to the way we use weed abatement programs, we will first ask the resident to go ahead and manage their own property. But if they don't, similar to a weed maintenance program, we will go ahead and bring someone in to do vegetation management, and then we will affix it on their property tax.
I wonder, touching on the list that you provide of targeted species to remove, will you be extending that list to kind of provide homeowners with some guidance of what to select and how to select? Because I often found when I was overseeing shaded fuel breaks and fire hardening on properties, people just don't know. They don't understand what to keep. They don't understand what's dangerous. They don't understand, you know, what can be a ladder fuel. So they need some help. And you guys have done such a great job kind of creating a guiding article, a document for the roads. And it was so well put together with a lot of clarity to this is what we're doing and this is how we're doing it. Do you plan on making anything like that for the homeowners so that they have some clarification on how to achieve these tasks on their property in those 100 feet?
Great question. So currently the answer is no. What we do currently is our tree protection ordinance was primarily designed because the town wanted to protect heritage trees and
yes, I love that.
Right, and very specific species. And so traditionally in town, you needed a permit, which could get costly to remove any tree. And so what we did was we said, look, if you're removing trees that aren't protected under the kind of like the heritage tree ordinance, you no longer need expensive permitting to do that. We will allow you to go ahead and limb up trees and remove trees. That being said, if you're going to start doing something more aggressive and you want to touch a heritage tree, that's still going to require a permitting process for us. In terms of what are, you know, better fuel management species versus, you know, other non-flammable or more flammable species, right now we kind of revert folks back to UC Davis, you know, and the listing they have. What we are noticing though, because of a lot of the current kind of wildland management laws coming out of the Capitol and future laws coming out of the Capitol, is we're noticing the architecture community, you know, who are putting together design plans, are having to learn a lot more about landscaping and what is appropriate landscaping. So
yeah,
I think it's going to be a collaboration of folks coming together as opposed to the town, you know, putting together what we think is the definitive list. And so for right now, that's a little more organic, the way that process is going to happen, as opposed to us doing a, you know, kind of a list from the town perspective.
And you actually touched on something that I was curious about while I was reviewing your town's documents. It might have been in another location that I didn't see, but there wasn't anything that I came across that touched on home hardening on an architectural level, with, you know, change of roofing materials, change of venting materials, changing for siding. If you're gonna, you know, do a maybe not new construction, because there's laws that apply to new construction, but if you're going to, you know, revamp something on your home, are you guys directing people towards home hardening in any way that would then be tied into some of this WUI preparedness?
So we do. So our community development office, who is responsible for development in the town, they have always just updated our municipal code predicated on what the new advisories are out of the state in terms of actual construction. And so we've always maintained that update whenever updates come forward in terms of materials, to your point, you know, roofing materials, window materials, all that type of actual construction. So in that regard, we're always just up to date with whatever the latest guidance is from the state in terms of actual materials and construction. So yes, what was different though was we basically just had a sentence saying, you know, we now utilize, you know, I think it's chapter 49 of the state code, and then we didn't really say anything more. And so when we updated our municipal code, that's where we added a lot of narrative about defensible space and things like that. But we weren't trying to diminish the fact that we do also stay compliant on the material side. It was more of like an opportunity to do some additional education with our community on the defensible space side.
That's fantastic. In the work that we're trying to put together with this program, a lot of information is leading to not only the trees and the shrubbery as fuels being fire management, but really your home being hardened appropriately goes hand in hand with being prepared for fire. So that's great that you guys have both sides of that covered. Well, I appreciate all of the information. That's fantastic.
No worries. And to your point, you know, I think typical wildland management was always perceived from a forestry perspective, and it's the concept of managing from the outside in. I think for us as communities, we're really focusing on the concept of managing from the inside out, you know, with your home being the nucleus of your kind of management, and then everything emanating out from there. And so I think collectively, you know, if we can get our residents to understand that they need to manage from the inside out, and then we still have, you know, CAL FIRE and all these other organizations that are trying to manage from the outside in, I think collectively we'll have safer communities.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to look at that. It's very true. Each individual does need to evaluate their residents and what they can do from their building out. And as we progress with new research and new information, having it well spelled out like you have for residents to be able to refer to and say, okay, these are the ordinances, these are the regulations, this is why we're doing this, this is how they're doing this. That's very helpful to educate the community and get that buy-in. So thank you. I appreciate that. That is great information. I know you guys have been referenced a few times in different articles that I've read from, for example, Greenbelt Alliance, and hopefully we can get more towns and cities to follow your lead and take it upon themselves to really educate themselves on what they can do for their town and how they can be prepared without waiting for somebody else to come and do it.
Well, thanks. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, one of the beauties of government is there is no concept of plagiarism. We all stand on the shoulders of others. I've certainly learned watching some communities in the North and Marin. And so we're happy to share anything we're doing with other communities, because collectively, yeah, fire doesn't know borders, they don't know town borders, they don't know county borders. And so, you know, we're doing everything we can to come together and work together here. And I encourage any other community to do the same.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to help people who maybe don't know what their options are, and not be fearful in their next step of how to prepare. You don't have to cut down every tree. You don't have to have a barren land in order to save yourself. There's some strategy to it, and you're there to guide them through that. So that's fantastic. Well, thank you, Arn. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us today. And we will have your city's documents available as a reference on our website for anybody who wants to look at them and see what you guys have done and created, so that they can have them as a guiding principle as well. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.